Hi, this is Pat Johnson, your sociology instructor. In this mini lecture, we're going to look at the poverty debate in the United States. Basically, there are two sides to the poverty debate. In other words, what causes poverty in our country? One side says we should blame the individual, that it's the individual's cause for being poor, and that it's the individual's responsibility for getting out of poverty. The other side is blame the system. In other words, there are forces in our society that causes some people to be poor, and therefore we should change the system. If you blame the individual, or as your author of your textbook says, blame the victim, you are saying that some people are poor because they're not taking responsibility. They are lazy, and if they would just get off their butts and work, that they would be less likely to be poor. There is the idea that people who are poor don't want to work and that they live in a culture of poverty. Maybe their parents were poor. Maybe they lived in a household where the adult was not a wage earner, but lived off transfer payments and obtained welfare. And that they learned to rely on that, and that there could be just the upbringing that work doesn't get you much and that it's better to live off the system. People who blame the individual also say that if you have kids outside of marriage, you are taking yourself into a likelihood of being poor, and that is a personal choice and personal responsibility, and that if you wanted to not be poor, that you wouldn't do those type of behaviors. Another reason that people blame the individual for poverty is that if you drop out of school, if a person does not get at least a high school education, they are more likely to be poor. So it's the individual's responsibility to stay in school. Another reason for people to blame the individual is to say that people who engage in criminal activity are more likely to be poor, so you need to not do those behaviors. Also, abusing drugs is highly correlated to being in poverty, so that people who do drugs are more likely to put themselves into the lower class, the underclass in our society. So basically, this side of the debate is saying that it's the person's fault that they are poor, and it is also the person's responsibility for changing these behaviors to get themselves out of poverty. People who blame the system side of the poverty debate believe that there are social forces built into our society that keep people poor. In other words, it's not the fault of the individual. It's the fault of society. People who blame the system claim that it is harder for minorities to get out of poverty because of the discrimination that is part of our society. People who blame the system also say that minimum wages are too low, and that if the minimum wage was higher, that there would be less likelihood for people in the lower paying jobs in our society not to be able to subsist. So make the minimum wage higher and bring people out of poverty. People who believe in the blame the system side of the argument also believe that poor schools in some areas of our society are the reason why some people are poor, that they didn't get a good education. And if we fix the schools, then there would be fewer people in poverty. People who blame the system say that people who are poor in our country can't afford child care, and that if there were more subsidies, tax-supported subsidies for child care, that people who were poor and had children could work and not have all their pay going to child care and could pull themselves out of poverty. So What do you believe? Where's the truth in this? What do you think causes poverty? Is it the individual? Is it the system? And then, whether it is the individual or the system, what can be done to fix it? Do we need to fix the system? Do people need to take responsibility for their own behavior? Where do you fit into this debate with your belief system and what you have seen in our society among the poor?